a place to live? Do you have a right to continue growing and building our relationships in our communities? Great. So welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful Monday afternoon. We are here to support the increase in relocation legislation for victims of the Ellis Act. It's an incredibly important piece of legislation. We know the Ellis Act is decimating our communities, and our folks need a stronger safety net from the city to be able to stay and live in the city that is theirs. Continue to build relationships, continue to build communities and neighborhoods, and not be displaced, not have to leave their home. So my name is Maria. I'm the San Francisco Housing Rights Organizer for Causa Justa, Just Cause, and I will be introducing our incredible lineup of super courageous speakers, of incredible allies, of elected officials who are really taking responsibility for that, or taking into account the needs of our folks during this housing crisis, and really moving to ensure that our folks are able to stay in San Francisco, that San Francisco continues to be a city where working class folks can continue living, where families can still live, where communities of color and immigrants are still welcome, and we don't all have to move and leave our families and our communities. So let's get us started so that we can all make it to the Land Use Committee. So the first person I want to introduce is Supervisor David Campos, who is sponsoring this legislation. He's going to tell us a little bit more about the legislation and how it is going to kind of address one of the aspects of this affordability crisis. We know it's not the whole solution, but it is a really important part of it. So let's welcome David Campos.
Thank you very much, Maria. And if I may ask my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors who are co-sponsoring this legislation to please come up. I want to thank Supervisor Avalos, Supervisor Marr, and I know that Supervisor Kim is also a co-sponsor. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. You know, we have a united front when it comes to people in this building acknowledging that we have an affordability crisis and a housing crisis in San Francisco. And I'm proud that we have come forward, not only as a Board of Supervisors, the Mayor's Office as well, to talk about that. And part of the solution is to change state law so that the loophole in the Ellis Act that allows these speculators to come in and exploit the situation is closed. But to do that, it's going to take time. Even if we get everything we want in Sacramento, it's going to be probably a year, it's going to be months before we have state legislation that actually closes that loophole. And so the question is, what happens to the people that are facing eviction until then? Unless we do something locally, unless we actually do what we're trying to do today and make it so that relocation costs actually are reasonable enough for people to stay in San Francisco, unless we do that, hundreds of people are going to be forced out of San Francisco. Hundreds of people are going to be forced out of San Francisco, and not only is that impacting them, but it's impacting us as a city, because what we're talking about is protecting who we are as San Francisco, our very essence. We cannot have the diversity that San Francisco has had unless people are able to afford to live here. We have heard from the budget and legislative analysts that when the report came out in November, there was a 170% increase in Ellis Act evictions. We know from our friends and colleagues in the Tenants Union and the Chinatown Development Center, Causa Justa Housing Rights Committee, that the numbers are much higher. And you're talking about at least 300 households a year being Ellis Act evicted. And right now, what the law provides is that if you're facing an eviction, the most that you can get is $5,200 for that eviction. It doesn't matter how long you lived in your building. It doesn't matter what kind of investment you made, not only in your unit, but in your neighborhood. That is not enough. $5,200 does not buy you much in this market. So what this legislation does, it actually follows the guidance of the courts that have said, San Francisco, you have an interest in doing whatever you can to make sure that when people are being evicted, that you allow them to stay in San Francisco. That's precisely what this legislation does. And how does it do that? It actually ties the relocation costs to the market. it actually ties it to what's happening out there, because we know that right now the market is not in line with this $5,200 figure. So what this does, it says, if you are being Ellis Act evicted, the landlord is got to pay the difference between what you're paying and what the market actually requires you to pay for a comparable unit, and it's going to be required for 2 years. What that means is that for people like the Lee family, instead of talking about $5,200, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. And sure, that is not a panacea, that it's not going to be enough long term, but it actually gives people a fighting chance to stay in San Francisco. I am tired of seeing my neighbors in the Mission, in Bernal Heights, being pushed out, and then when they're evicted, being given an amount of money that does not even allow them to stay in the Bay Area, let alone San Francisco. We have also, at this hearing, you're going to be hearing from advocates who point out that once someone faces an eviction, the odds of that person staying in San Francisco are pretty low. That once a San Franciscan, including people who have been here for decades, gets that notice, that that person is immediately pushed out, not only of the city, but of the entire Bay Area. San Francisco, we cannot let that happen. That's why this legislation is here. And let me say this, that this legislation is not legislation that just came out of an office. This is legislation that comes from the very grassroots. We've had a number of tenants conventions throughout the city in the last few months, and in each one of those tenants conventions, this legislation was overwhelmingly pointed to as a key solution to this problem, because what it does, it actually allows people who are facing eviction today to have a chance to stay in the city. So I call upon my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. All of them have acknowledged that we have an affordability crisis. I call upon them to pass this legislation, and to not only pass it with a majority, but to pass it unanimously at the Board of Supervisors. And I also call upon our mayor, who is working to change the Ellis Act, to make sure that as we make those changes in Sacramento, that we, in the meantime, give people the chance to stay in San Francisco and sign this legislation. So I want to thank you for being here. What we're fighting for is the future of San Francisco. We want a city that works for all of us. We want a city that recognizes that we cannot be San Francisco if working people, middle-income people are pushed out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Supervisor David Campos. So now I want to introduce Blanca Reyes. Blanca Reyes is a longtime Mission resident. She's fighting with her whole building against an Ellis Act right now, and as she's told me multiple times, there is nothing that the landlord is going to offer me that is more important to me than my home. So let's welcome Blanca.
Sure.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Blanca Reyes, muchos de ustedes ya me conocen. Ya estuve la vez pasada en otra asamblea hablando de el problema que tenemos del acto Ellis. Yo soy una víctima más del acto Ellis y una corporación ha comprado el lugar donde yo vivo, donde he estado por 24 años viviendo allí.
So my name is Blanca Reyes. Some of you may already know me. I have spoken at other gatherings about the Ellis Act. I am another victim of this law. A corporation is now the owner of my property and is a unit of which I've lived in for the past 24 years.
Sí, primeramente me ofrecieron $25,000 para que me moviera y me dieron 2 meses para moverme. Pero hoy, este fin de semana, las cosas han cambiado y me han mandado otra nota ofreciéndome $45,000 para que me mueva nuevamente en 90 días.
The landlord keeps offering me buyouts with dates for me to move out. Originally, they offered me $25,000 and told me, and 2 months to move. They've now, things have changed, and this past weekend I got a notice offering me $45,000 and 90 days to move.
Les quiero decir que esta situación es muy frustrante. No se puede vivir tranquilo y no se puede concentrar. Las personas no podemos concentrar. También le afecta a la familia, a mi hija en este caso que está en la universidad. No se puede concentrar.
This whole situation has impacted me and my family heavily. We cannot concentrate. I can't concentrate at work. My daughter, who is a college student, can't concentrate in her school. The impact that this has had on us is incredibly heavy.
Esta es una situación que nos está pasando a muchas personas de todas las razas. Y es muy triste ver personas llorando y también personas latinas como yo, que a lo mejor no están con los documentos legales y tienen miedo de ir de reportar estos casos. Les pido por favor de que vayan, de que no tengan miedo. Ahí nadie les va a estar pidiendo papeles ni nada. Que no tengan miedo, que luchemos, que salgamos adelante.
This is an incredibly scary experience, and it's really sad to see so many people hurt, so many people crying. This is an issue that is impacting us across communities as well. And as a Latina, I really am. It's especially hard for me to see when this happens to other Latinos.